No, I wanted to close that. We never actually ran a model, so I just, if you're kind of going to be following along now, let's look at that last model I did, the supply and demand model with the two counterfactuals, which were corner solutions. Just to let you know, I mean, GAMS Studio is an editor, but it's also integrated into running the program itself. You don't have to leave like you did in the old days and run it through the DOS command or things. So this is the program I had. I just want to let you know that the little green arrow up there is the run button. And so if you click that, it runs the program, and on the right panel will come up something that, do we still call that the process window, Tom?
Yeah, the
Okay.
log.
That's kind of the log or process window, and that will tell you if there's errors made. You can often click on that error and it will take you to the point in your program where the error is. It still can be some work to find out, but look for missing semicolons. The program just gets confused. Now I have it set so that when you run a program, it automatically opens the listing file, which is the solution that starts with an echo print of the model. But I know Collins didn't. I think that has to be done in the setting so that you automatically goes into the listing file.
Yeah, I'm not sure actually.
Yeah. So if I go to File, Settings, I think there's somewhere that you clicked so that it automatically opens the .lst file. Sorry about this. I should have.
I think, by the way,
It's me again. I got it now.
okay. Up in View, you can pull up the project. What is it here? Project Explorer. That's where my list file is coming up.
Okay,
See View up at the top next to Tools.
Yeah,
View.
Yeah, View and Project Explorer
At the top.
at the top, the first one. Yeah. See what that does. So that gives you
Right.
the list file there. Then you have to click it. But-
Right,
yeah.
right, but
Oh, okay,
there
sorry.
is a setting that automatically opens it.
It's okay. There's a way to get to it though.
Okay. So we'll just forget
But
this.
anyway, the results are in that list file for the people.
Yes.
You would just click
Yes.
on the little
So
.ls.
if you want to not scroll through a big program, you can just go down to where it says solve there. Click on that and it gives you the first solve, and this is a valid solution. Positive levels for variables, 0 levels for marginals. This was the first counterfactual where the supply curve lies above the demand curve. You get that solution where price is positive, but output is 0. The marginal is 1. That's the difference between marginal cost and price at the equilibrium. And then the second solve gives the opposite result. Price is 0, it's a free good, but quantity is positive. The consumer is saturated. You know, the rest of it is thrown away. You have a marginal on that. So just to let you know, that's not a very good introduction to actually the mechanics of running things. But I do like to start out with this studio because the integration of the editor with the software is really is nice. It's good. Okay, so we will kind of go back and forth for the next hour and a half or so. And so let me open this set of slides. This is on full screen if you want. You should have, this is one of the things I sent. I forget exactly what the notes to or something like that is what I said. And so this introduces a general equilibrium model and its components in kind of one set of notes. So first of all, I mean, what is a general equilibrium model? Well, typically involves multiple interacting agents, individual behaviors based on optimization. Um, I love behavioral economics, but there's infinitely many non-optimizing behaviors. So it's something that's still a cornerstone of modeling, really. Interactions are mediated by markets and prices. That doesn't have to be the case. We have models with externalities, environmental externalities or other kind of externalities. And I don't think we'll be getting into those this week. By the way, I have a huge model library on my website. And we can give you the address for that. That has a lot of notes and the actual GAMS files as well. And many people have used that for self-teaching. Equilibrium, I don't want to give a micro-theorist definition of equilibrium, but basically there's two kinds of things that have to hold. Agents subject to the constraints they face are doing the best they can. They can't do better by altering their behavior given what other agents are doing. And secondly, markets clear. So for example, supply equals demand in each market. We have models in which, some of those things might not hold, or by clearing, I can also mean corner solutions where some technology is not used or some trade link is inactive in equilibrium. Okay, so the steps in GE modeling are typically, you start out specifying the dimensions of the model. How many goods factors are there, number of consumers, number of countries, number of active markets, inactive markets. We have the problem of deciding how unprofitable it might be. Second step is choosing functional forms. I mean, obviously everything has to have an explicit functional form. We're not, writing simulation models as f of y equals f of x. We have to know what f is. Some theorists don't like that. So choose production functional forms for production. Transformation function is a word we just use for the opposite of the production function. You have one input and multiple outputs. My model library has a refinery scheduling problem where you put in crude oil and you have to choose the mixture between, there's some substitution possibilities between gasoline, diesel, and kerosene, jet fuel. So that's kind of the opposite of a CES. You have a CET. You choose utility functions and then side constraints on various things. These could be anything from endogenous tax rates to markup formulas in models with imperfect competition. You'll see some of those tomorrow for sure. You include choices of inputs and outputs for each activity and maybe specification of initially inactive activities. Have a model that's based on the idea of smuggling, and there's a legal way of getting the good into the country and an illegal way that's inefficient. It takes more resources. You have to carry this stuff through the jungle on your back. And you start raising the tax rate and all of a sudden, bam, there's a jump to the illegal technology and tax revenue goes to zero. It's kind of cool. The undergraduates like that. Third step, that you don't have to do, but in learning and making up small models just to teach yourself, I think this is a very good, important step, and that's constructing a micro-consistent data set. And I will define that, and we'll actually show what that is. And so data, you can just make up numbers, make up examples for yourself to teach and learn in very simple environments. So the data satisfies zero profits for all activities. That could include monopoly markup. So a more general word than zero profits is product exhaustion. Any revenue has to go somewhere. And the data satisfies market clearing for all markets. That could include zero activities in some of those markets. Then calibration in bigger models. This is often 90% of the work. My model calibrates, you hear somebody screaming down the hall. And that's basically choosing values for parameters so that the functional forms and data are consistent. And by consistent, I mean the data represents a solution of the model. You run the model and it just spits back what you put in. That's called the replication check. And it's really valuable because if
It's a necessary but not a sufficient condition. Well, makes sense.
well said, okay, because if you don't pass the replication check, there's some, you don't know what's going on. You can't just start running counterfactuals.
But it does emphasize the fact that there's this, we're going a level beyond. There's much public policy which is driven by what is the numbers about what's going on, right? So a lot of the agonizing is let's collect the data and let's sort out what the world looks like. Here we're thinking about going beyond that. We're saying, given how the world looks like, what will happen if we change this or that, right? So it's policy on top of what we observe. So it's important to bear in mind that this process of calibration to the benchmark means we collect data that describes the world as we see it. That alone, in many applications, turns out to be very useful by itself because you're forced, the model gives you discipline over how you collect the data so that not only do you have primal, but you have dual constraints on you. Supply equals demand and exhaustion of product. You have to come up with a description of exactly what's happening. And that by itself is helpful. That's building a model. There oftentimes are many theories that describe what the effect is of the instrument, but just getting to the data point where you're starting from is helpful.
Okay, once you pass the replication check, you can go to work, run the model. Okay, so I'm going to do this in terms of a specific example, and this is how I taught myself by making up these little models. I think it's enormously useful for understanding things, even if you're going to use somebody else's off-the-shelf models, which is just do this in simple cases. Don't complicate it. Do one thing at a time, and you'll make all kinds of errors that you never thought about, and it's a great way to learn. Okay, so this kind of looks like a closed economy hexaroline model for those. There's two goods and two factors. Abstracting from intermediate goods, that can be put in, or joint products on the output side, that can be put in. And there's one representative consumer, which we often do. I have models with two households and that have different utility functions and different factor endowments. So all of these things can be generalized, but starting simple. This is kind of this weird hexaroline assumption that L and K are labor and capital are in total fixed supply, but can be moved freely between sectors. Trade economists have loved this model for 50 years, and it doesn't make any sense. You can change shoe machinery into a combine harvester costlessly, but you can't increase the total number of machines. Okay? I'm not responsible for that. So PX, PY, PL, and PK are prices of L, Y, X, Y, L, K respectively. I is income, and PW will denote the price of one unit of welfare, or it's also called the expenditure function. If you read my notes, the JGEA paper. So PW is also what we refer to as the consumer price index. Models with many households, you can have each of them each of them has a different price index if they have different preferences and things. So it's a really useful thing. So here are just some equations. X is a function of LX and KX, Y, LY, KY. Labor and capital are in fixed supply. The star just denotes a parameter. Essentially, you can change that, see what happens, and we will do that. And welfare or utility is a function of X and Y. And then there's a budget constraint that says revenues derived from selling labor and capital to the market are spent on buying X and Y. So how do we find equilibrium prices and factor allocations? Well, this isn't an economic model. This is just a set of technical relations. You can't run this model. Any values of L and K will solve, you'll get some solution, but it doesn't represent an economic equilibrium. So to get to an economic equilibrium, you have to embody behavior, you have to embody optimization. This is such a simple model, you could treat it as a constrained optimization problem, maximizing the utility function subject to the other equations as constraints, and it would actually work in such a simple case. But past a simple case, it breaks down very quickly. Actually, treating it as an optimization problem, it sort of follows from the first theorem of welfare economics. People still teach that competitive equilibrium. Our Pareto optimal, we only have one consumer. So the alternative approach, which we're following, is to convert the problem to a system of equations and inequalities and solve that system. Those equations have to embody this optimizing behavior for firms and households. So what we do is solve the cost minimization problems for producers and consumers so that optimization is embedded in those equations to the model. Okay, so hope you had a chance maybe to read that notes. I said that JGEA paper. What you want to do is convert from the production functions to cost functions. Unit cost. What is the cost of producing? What is the minimum cost of producing a unit of X at prices PL and PK, or the factors of production? And on the utility side, we do the same thing. We just have a different name for it. It's typically called an expenditure function, but it is exactly a cost function. It's the cost, the minimum cost of producing one unit of utility at goods prices, PX and PY. Now, the next step is provided by a theory which we call Shepard's lemma. I guess it's called a lemma because it follows from the envelope theorem. That's why we call it that. Everyone gets taught this in first year master's micro and then promptly forget about it for the rest of their lives. But it's actually immensely useful in general equilibrium modeling because it then gives you the factor and goods demand functions that you need to be consistent with those technologies. Okay, so I have to always reteach when I teach PhD students this. I have to reteach them. I say, "Do you know what Shepard's lemma is?" No, yeah, well, we heard of it, but no, we don't really know what it says. Well, you had it last year in micro. Oh, no. We had to get on to game theory. So this model is going to be, the general equilibrium is going to be a solution to a square system of 9 weak inequalities and weak unknowns. And this is something that's going to be very generalizable to very, very large models. These 9 inequalities fall into 3 categories. And there's a 4th that we'll get into later, which is called auxiliary equations, like markup equations or things like that. So first of all, there's these pricing inequalities, 0 profit inequalities, but it applies also with imperfect competition markups. And we're going to do that for sure tomorrow. Second, market clearing inequalities, supply greater than demand. We talked about that this morning. And then income balance equations. And there's really a 4th category, which is these extra or auxiliary equations, such as a markup formula for Corno or Bertrand competition set. And then there's 9 unknowns in the model. Here I put the prices in lower cases and quantities in upper. So for an economic equilibrium complementarity problem, each of these has to be associated with the correct variable. If you have a fully interior solution, sometimes you can get away with misspecifying which one is, but not a good idea. So this is just a quick repetition from this morning. The zero profit conditions, if they hold as a strict inequality, that means it's an unprofitable activity. So the complementary variable is the quantity. You're just not going to use that technology or that trade link. So the complementary variable to a zero profit condition is a quantity. So you have price inequality, quantity. And for market clearing, it's the other way around. You have a quantity inequality and a price variable. So this is not that common, but if supply strictly exceeds demand in equilibrium, then the price is zero. It's a free good. Okay, and then the income balance equations are more just sort of definitional. You could actually substitute out for them, but there's, when people are doing analytical theory, the trick is to get the number of equations down to the minimum possible, hopefully 2 equations and 2 unknowns. And in computer modeling, there's no need to do that. And in fact, it can really obscure things. If you start substituting for income, you put in labor income plus capital income, and you sort of lose the overall general equilibrium structure. So no need to try to reduce the dimensionality of the model. The computer is really good at solving thousands of equations. Okay, so this is now an economic model, right? It's embodying the optimization at the level of the industry or the consumer. Now, this is what we call, again, in my notes, I'm skipping over some stuff that I sent you, this Journal of Global Economic Analysis paper. This is what we call the Hicksian formulation rather than the Marshallian formulation. And it's weird when people first see it, or I thought it was it took a little while for me to wrap my head around it. Because basically what it's doing is treating utility as a produced good. So treating it exactly as if it was a market good. So utility is produced by taking commodities and assembling them costlessly into something called utility. So it has a zero profit inequality and a market clearing equality. And that seems weird to a lot of people. I think it seemed weird to me at first. It took me a little while to get my head wrapped around it because it's not something that's really observed, but you can figure out what it has to be when you specify the model, and I'll show you that. Okay. It's really useful because it means that it's computing utility and the price index as part of the solution. If you use the Marshallian approach, which is I show in that paper, the JGE paper, that works fine, but then you would have to compute utility and the price index after you solve the model, see what those are. So this just really puts it as part of the solution. And if you have models with multiple households or multiple countries, it gives you the welfare levels and the price index automatically as part of the solution. So once I realized the usefulness of this, I got my mind around it quite quickly.
Yeah.
So that third inequality is the expenditure function greater than or equal to the price of utility, which we call the consumer price index. And then there's a supply and demand. Equation 6 says welfare, the supply of welfare that's produced in this mysterious background mental production function equals income divided by the price of a utility. That's just, we call that the indirect utility function in theory. That's all that is. So utility is a function of prices and income rather than goods. Okay. Shepard's lemma comes in 7 and 8 in that the demand for labor from the X sector, so looking at equation 7 here, the demand for labor in the X sector the optimal amount of labor to use to produce 1 unit of X is just by Shepard's lemma, the derivative of the cost function with respect to the price of labor. So this is Shepard's lemma that you forgot about promptly after your master's micro course, showing how useful it is. Because otherwise, it'd be really hard to figure out what on earth that thing might be. Okay. Flickering. It's that light. So these derivatives give you the optimal unit input requirements of labor for X and Y and for capital for X and Y. So Shepard's lemma is super useful in this exercise. Okay, so let me turn to this idea of micro-consistent data, and real data may not be. And then there's techniques for what do you do about that. These input-output tables are often simply fudged, right? I was saying at lunch that in the World Input-Output Database, I'm quite sure that something that's just called capital is actually computed as not computed, just calculated as a residual to make the whole thing balance, okay? So things like profits or intangible service flows are just thrown into this measure to make it consistent. What do we mean by consistent? It means that the data satisfies the conditions for an economic equilibrium. The data could be generated as the solution to some model. Okay, so the data must satisfy zero profits, market clearing, and income balance. So this problem that we're looking at could be thought of as consisting of 3 production activities, X, Y, and W. Welfare is treated as a produced good. 5 markets, X, Y, L, K, and W, and then income balance. So one way of representing this data, which is not really how an input-output table looks exactly, but I think it's useful for creating a model, is to make up a little matrix, which you could call a micro-consistent data matrix or something. And the one I've made up, the columns are going to correspond to production activities and consumers. So it's going to look like something like this. The columns are X, Y, W, and consumer. The rows correspond to markets. So the complementary variables to markets are prices. So I'll put the price variables on the left-hand side to look like that. Positive entry signifies a receipt or a sale in a particular market. A negative entry signifies an expenditure or purchase in that market. These numbers are values, not quantities. So maybe not something we'll get into much. The modeler is often free to decide choices of units as to, of that value, how much is a price and how much is a quantity, but then you have to be consistent without the model. So, if somebody makes $48,000 a year, you can decide that's 1 year of labor at a price of 48,000. Q is 1 and P is 48,000. Or no, I was going to use 52. There's 52 weeks in the year, not 48. Or you could say it's $1,000 a week with a quantity of 52. Both of those are, if you only have expenditures, both of those are perfectly correct. You just have to keep it consistent at different places in the model. Okay, the data is the definition of micro-consistent is column and row sums are 0. So here's the little values that we're going to use in this model to start with. The X sector has a receipt of 100 units for selling X, and it expends 25 units on labor and 75 on capital. So that's the capital intensive sector. This is very Hectorian looking. The Y sector, oops, we have an extra entry in there. that's not supposed to be there. Under Y, PX is supposed to be 0. Produces 100 units of Y, sorry about that. From 75 units of labor, 25 of capital. So that's the labor intensive sector. And then welfare is produced, again, get your mind around that, by taking 100 units of X and 100 units of labor of Y and producing 200 units of labor of utility of welfare W. And then the consumer income column, you derive income from selling labor and capital to the market, 100 units each. And with that, you purchase an input of utility. So you have a minus 200 there. So the row sums are 0, the column sums are 0, and that's what we mean by micro consistency. Okay, and if you're making up simple examples to teach yourself or figure out how to model a particular issue, I just urge you to do this. You don't have to do this. You can just put in some factor endowments and let the model rip. But this is just is good practice for learning. Okay. So then this next step is calibration and replication. So this is choosing parameters for functional forms, for choosing functional forms and the parameter values such that the values are consistent with this data. What does consistency mean? It means you run the model and you just spits back what you put in. Exactly the same thing. So I'm going to use Cobb-Douglas. Tom hates that, but for starting out, people kind of know this. So this is just a teaching tool. Doesn't mean we stop there. So the expenditure function, the data says that there's equal shares spent on X and Y, and I'm going to assume that units are chosen so that all prices are 1. So, and actually for Cobb-Douglas, it doesn't matter that the expenditure shares are the exponents in the utility function. Okay, you run that through an optimization problem and you get the expenditure function, which also is we say it's self-dual. And that's true for all CES functions. So if the utility function is Cobb-Douglas, the expenditure function is as well, which makes this just an easy teaching tool. So the shares are 1.5. So the expenditure function, the minimum expenditure necessary for 1 unit of utility is just PX to the 1/2 times PY to the 1/2. X industry, I'm going to use Cobb-Douglas for all 3 utility X and Y. In the X production, the capital share is 75, labor share is 25. And again, the production function in Cobb-Douglas or all CES is self-dual. So the exponents in the cost function are 20.25, 0.75. So it's great to work through that paper and pencil algebra to get these things when one is learning. Y sector has the opposite factor intensities. The Y sector is labor intensive as a share of 75 in the cost function and 0.25 for capital. Okay, our good friend Shepard's lemma. We need to know in the market clearing conditions, we need to know the demands for labor and capital in the 2 sectors. And given that we have the cost functions, that is now fairly easily derivable. The labor, so this is just one example of the 4 factor input coefficients. Labor in the Y sector is just the derivative of the unit cost function with respect to the price of labor times the output level of Y in equilibrium. So we just take the derivative of the cost function with respect to price of labor. We get this. Sometimes I simplify it and write it that instead of 0.75 minus 1, I write 0.75 divided by PL, because this is the cost function coming back at you. Um, and that's equal to the price of X, which is a shortcut that I probably shouldn't take because it avoids what happens when there's a corner solution.
Yeah, exactly.
Corner solution Y is 0.
You have to be careful.
You have to be careful. I probably shouldn't do that. Okay. So then the replication check is to run the model, and it should return the values that you started with. So we'll do that now, but I want to emphasize that this framework, and Tom's responsible for a lot of this, is really generalizes to far more complicated situations. You can put in taxes, subsidies, quotas, licenses. We know how to use equal yield tax reform, multiple household types, can have endogenous tax rates. I have all of these things in my model library. Public consumption or intermediate goods, pollution, production externalities, increasing returns, imperfect competition, blah, 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 blah.
So I have one thing I'd like to add, Jim, at this point. Could I
Sure.
jump in and steal the screen for just 1 minute? I want to go
Yeah.
back to the basic definition of this thing. So you stop sharing and then this
Oh,
will stop.
how do I do that?
No, just don't do anything. I'm going to take over for you right now. It's just- Sure. It just told me I'm in charge, so I get to. So this is, now I have your slides on my screen.
Okay.
So I just want to point out something about this that's not, it really is not in any way, all I'm just trying to do is to help our understanding of what's happening here. And there's one aspect, Jim's relied heavily on Shepard's lemma, which is a good one. And then there's another useful piece of analytics related to these cost functions that can change the way you write down the model. For some people, it makes it easier to remember because, or for other people, it's just a footnote, right? So maybe that's just a footnote. The key thing is that the C function is linearly homogeneous. Cx and Cy and E are all linearly homogeneous. If I multiply the prices by a constant, the cost goes up proportionally.
Okay.
There's no money illusion in this model. This is strictly just multiply through,
Yeah.
everything goes up.
Everything goes up. Right? Same
So if
way.
I then go back, I'm going to go to my model now. So CF, PX, PK, and PL is linearly homogeneous in price. There's no money illusion. That means that C of lambda times PK, lambda times PL is equal to lambda times C of PK and PL. If you differentiate those two sides, you get Euler's equation, Euler's theorem for homogeneous equations. That says the cost function is the demand coefficients times the prices. In other words, we can use a simple accounting identity to determine cost. It says that the cost of a given good is how much labor you use per unit times the wage rate, plus how much capital you use times the capital price. That simply is just saying, you can go back to first principles and that tells you what the cost is. You don't have to have, the dual formulation and the cost function is helpful. It relates it closely to, say, Varian's microeconomics textbook. But if you're just trying to do simple accounting, and I'm just going to show, if you use this approach, it doesn't change the model, but it changes the way you write the model. And in the GAMS programming, the key thing is that if you can then go in and define, and this is something we will learn more about, is how to use a macro in GAMS. I can simply say, I want to define some coefficients. A will be a compensated demand function of PL into X, A of PK into X, A of PL into Y, A of PK into Y. Those are all the compensated demand per unit. And I've just taken Jim's, just the same, those are the equations that are in Jim's code, it's sprinkled through the code because they show up both in the primal and the dual. And I've just defined those guys. Once I have those guys defined, then I can write the whole model just in terms of those coefficients. In other words, if we go back to his original equations, I'm going to just pop over to this guy. All I'm saying is that I can, rather than replacing the Cx and Cy by the equations that define the demand functions in those equations 7 and 8 and 4 and 5, I can instead go up to equations 1 through 3 and replace the cost functions by the prices times the coefficients, right?
Yeah.
And that way, then if you look at the model, all I'm just doing is just to show you this is a different way of thinking about the same model if it helps you. thinking about it. You don't have to think about duality then. You just think about adding up. How much labor am I using in X? What's the price of labor? How much capital am I using in X? That tells me how much it costs. As long as those A's, those compensated demand functions are consistently expressed, this is the model. There's no difference, right? So this is just a way of looking at the model. The beauty of this is that all the algebra that describes the cost functions, that's all suppressed. And notice the model doesn't change if I change the functional form. Nothing changes in the equation of the model. That's just details about the cost function is just a detail. What elasticities we assume, that just goes into the definition of the A coefficients. So that's all I wanted to do, Jim. I'll share this with these guys. So it's just a different way. The funny thing about this one is the inventor of this format, Lars Matthiessen, this was the format he recommended. This was his original format, was talking about net put vectors, and that's all it took. There was no mention of duality. At the time, I thought, oh, the duality was so cool because I took I taught Jim's trade class with Jim's textbook. I became so fascinated by all this duality stuff. I wanted to bring it all into my work because it seemed so neat and relevant. But now looking back and realize Matthiessen had a point here, right? Is that if you move all the cost function stuff offline, then you can abstract from all the details. And notice you can change the functional form and nothing changes about the model. It's just the model is not about, the functional form is not really part of the definition here. It's just that's the detail
of the model itself.
of the model itself.
But yeah, those A's have to be drawn. If you
They have to be
change
calibrated.
an elasticity of substitution or something, you have somewhere outside the model.
Yeah.
That thing gets respecified.
And it'll change the model because it'll change the way the thing responds and so forth. But in terms of explaining what the model is you're using, there's no difference. It's just that's, so I have to say, in my old age, I'm kind of liking this other format because it's nice and clean. It's like there's no, I'm
Sorry,
suddenly realizing,
I got you off track for 20.
no, it's
30
Marcus
years.
and I can blame you. But that's-
Well, all microeconomics courses in grad school are doing the same thing.
Yeah,
Like they go to, Shepherd's lemma and Euler equation. So
yeah. No, these are tools that are used everywhere. But what I like about this format is it's just intuition. There's no you don't have to remember any fancy stuff. You just write down zero profit, market clearance. It's just all straight.
Well, the fancy stuff is somewhere else in the program.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, let's be a little cautious about it. But yeah, your point is very well taken.
There you go, Jim. It's back to you.
Okay, now what
Just
do I?
the green button to say share and then you're off. And I apologize for jumping in.
No, I think that's cool. Okay, so I'm going to actually go. What am I doing? I'm trying to escape from full screen mode so I can open the studio. Okay. Oh, it's already open. So just I have to make one thing that really confused me about GAMS Studio. When you want to open, you have, it'll open to the directory you have your stuff in, or you can actually use file and say settings, and under settings, you could specify the default directory that, if you're working, you want to just stay in some directory. And so I have the default directory, the one for this course right now. But here's something else. Unsaved changes. If you want to open a file from that directory, just take my word for it. I always click open in new group. Boy, they did something screwy. I had 5 emails back and forth with the GAMS guys over this, especially because it's inconsistent with IDE.
Yeah, it's a big change.
Because if you open 3 files and you're editing the 3rd file and click run, it'll actually run the first file.
Yeah.
Which is completely stupid. I told them this was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. So I always click open in new group. And then the file you're working on, when you click run, will be the one that actually runs.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been better if they'd done the inverse and had open in the same group and open to be the default being open in the new group. That would have been a better way to do it. I agree.
Yeah. The GAMS guy told me, well, sorry, the bird has flown. Yeah, agent. Oh, I wasted more time on that one. Finally, I wrote to GAMS, I said, I'm teaching a course in the Ukraine, the Ukrainian and Georgian students, and you better give me an answer so I can teach this right. And they wrote back like within an hour. Sorry. Okay, so this is the file. It's called Madison 1. You should have it in the zip file that I sent out. Remember again to document your work, because you go back in a couple weeks or maybe, worse, a couple months, and you don't remember what it is. An alternative to putting a star in the first column in GAMS is you can put in a block, and it starts with $ on text and ends with $ off text. And then you don't, you can edit, you can change, and the spacing doesn't matter, and you don't have to put a star in the first column for everything. Okay, so in this particular model, there's really only two parameters, the labor endowment and the capital endowment. I could put in parameters for these shares in the Cobb-Douglas thing, but I wanted to make it as transparent as possible so you actually see the numbers in the file. And that little data matrix is correct now. I don't have that extra entry under Y and P of X. You can use the slash to set the initial value of parameter, or as I said, you can use just an equal sign. Okay. Variables they're all non-negative variables. Everything here is constrained to be non-negative. W, X, and Y are quantities. Prices, PX, PY, PL, PK, PW, and income is I. And with a semicolon, the next word's a keyword. You can get away without the semicolon. Don't do it. You just have to learn that any list parameters assignments, each one of them is considered a separate statement. So you have to put a semicolon after each one of them. Names of the equations, I try to make those transparent as you can, so you look at it a month later and you know what they are. So zero profits, there's 3 of those. Market clearing, 5 of those. Income balance. Okay, so then the GAMS notation is the name of the equation, ... and then the equation written as greater than or equal to. So we have these 3 zero profit equations that are the cost functions, the Cobb-Douglas functions calibrated from the data matrix. So those shares are not arbitrarily chosen. They're coming from the shares of labor and capital in the data I want to replicate.
It's important to note here, we write these as greater than or equal to, but in this, the way the structure of this model is such that the price of X and the price of Y will never go to 0. So you're never going to have a corner solution in this particular example. Mm-hmm. So they always will be equalities. And that's what we're saying. But in the MCP format, that's fine. As you associate them, as long as the variables are always going to be internal, then those will always be binding. Mm-hmm. So it'll never be, none of those equations, those inequalities will ever be slack.
Right. Yeah. And that has to be remembered in things like Armington models. The Armington assumption, if you don't know what that is, no worries for now, but national product level differentiation things are never 0, getting an internal solution. Because the price, as quantity goes to 0, the price goes off to infinity. So then the 2 market clearing conditions, we're back to duality. That's the application of Shepard's lemma to the cost functions times the level values of outputs X and Y. And then supply and demand equations for X and Y and W are supply is greater than or equal to demand. That's again just derived, X and Y demands are derived by just applying Shepard's lemma to the expenditure function, the cost function for producing utility. And then income balance is more of a definitional equation. You can see you could actually substitute that out and put it in for W, but you know, in modeling, it's sometimes clearer to have all the equations there and not sort of try to reduce the dimensionality through substitution. Okay, and then the model declaration is the name of each equation dot complementary variable and ends with the starts and ends with a slash and semicolon. Now, there's one more issue that also people probably taught in a like master's micro and then promptly forget about for the rest of their lives, which is there's kind of an extra equation in the model. And the way we normally explain this is Bauer's law. Okay. The way people usually provide the intuition of it is saying, okay, we solve the model and we get a set of prices. But note in the model, if we doubled all those prices, it's still a solution to the model. Okay. If you double all prices, you double the cost of labor and capital, but you don't change their relative prices. So the mix that firms wants is the same, but you also are doubling the output price of the firm. So profits are still zero. Consumer prices to consumers of X and Y double, but so does their income. Okay, so the price level is indeterminacy is usually a way of thinking about Bauer's law and its extra equation. So the way we handle this computationally is you want to fix one price. And so I chose, this is a simple model with only one consumer. So the most obvious choice is to fix the cost of utility at 1. So the consumer price index is 1. Then when you get changes in the prices of capital and labor, they're automatically interpreted as real values. When you have multiple households or countries, you know, you can't.
You can rescale after the solution.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So .fx is the GAMS notation for fixing a variable. And I want to emphasize that's different from .l. .l is just setting its initial value, but .fx is fixing it.
But it's a shorthand for assigning pw.fx equals 1 is a shorthand for saying pw.low equals 1, pw.up equals 1. Low and up are the lower
So
bound
it's
and
got
upper
the
bound. So if you
signs,
set them both the same, then you fix the
Yeah.
variable.
And actually, when you unfix a variable, you have to put in those two commands. You have
Yeah.
to say
Lower bound.
dot px dot lo, not 0, lo equals 0, px dot up equals plus infinity.
Yeah.
Okay. So then these are the starting values that I think are the equilibrium values for the 9 variables. And so then I say solve the model. I called it closed economy using MCP. And then there's a couple counterfactuals here. One is to double the endowment of labor. So I double that to 200. Then the second one, I put that back to its initial value. Remember, any parameter value changes carried forward unless you undo it. And double the capital, and then I double both of them. And so intuitively, this is a very symmetric model. So doubling capital and doubling labor should just be mirror images of it. Also, everything has constant returns to scale. So if you double them all the level variables should double and the price variables should not change. Okay, so it's really good in learning experience for me was to do things where I knew the answer. All right, and if the model doesn't give me the answer, then I know that either my intuition and modeling are wrong, or there's a coding mistake or something, right?
Yeah.
So it's a frequent practice I use and recommend people when they're teaching themselves or trying out new models is just do an experiment where you know what has to happen. Okay. So let me leave the second part for the moment. So let's run the model. And so this says normal completion. And mine opens automatically to the .lst file. And we haven't figured out how to do that, did we?
Mine, for instance.
Does it?
Did you solve it?
I did see
Okay,
some.
yeah, you're gonna have to do what I did, which is you gotta go to tool view or whatever that was.
Yeah, but
I
there's
just
some
everybody
setting that
opened the
opens that.
Other part should go to, right?
Yeah, we need to figure that out, but if you just click that for now, yeah, that one.
But it doesn't even come up on the
Okay.
top bar. It doesn't come up. It's saying,
No, hers
Nothing.
isn't- mine doesn't either, you have to go click.
So I think, you know, in Washington, they probably have the same issue, so.
Is anybody's popping up for them, or are they not seeing it when they hit solve?
I'm getting a licensing error.
Oh.
No.
Did you get the license from Tom or from Martha?
Yeah, but I got it when we were doing that like demo a while ago. So it's saying the license expired 35 days ago.
Okay, so
They should get the one, did I send the one, I just sent one now, so let's just let's send
Oh,
off. the
okay.
one we have.
yeah, then you just close out and then,
Can you forward it because I didn't get that?
yeah, I can forward it, yeah. But simply what you would do when you get this is you just put it in your clipboard, close out of GAMS Studio and then reopen it. It should prompt you to write over the old license, but let me,
I just sent it to her, it's fine.
oh, you got it?
Yeah.
Okay,
I should have sent-
let's make sure everybody has the access at least that wants it. And then we can figure out how to make this thing
And you can also
auto-populate.
download it without license just for, you know, this week. If you don't want to deal with the license
Oh,
at this moment.
Yeah, but this one is
Okay.
good from December. It should be good for like several months.
okay.
It will expire end of February.
I need to edit that. I'm now using it no license yet.
Okay, but you got the solution, right?
Mhm.
So there's an automatically open list file option.
Yeah, I found it.
Okay.
So for everyone, sorry, I know you're working on the licensing file, but to go over here to file and then settings, there's a click here, open list file after running GAMS. So you want to click that. I don't know why you wouldn't want to click that. You run the model, you want to.
Some people just want to see the output in Excel. So sometimes
Oh.
if you're moving the money.
Right, okay,
Okay, yeah, mine works now, perfect.
okay. But for the purpose of this class, we it's just a lot easier if it automatically opens the listing file.
Yeah, it is, and plus I don't need that Explorer over there,
Yeah,
it cleans that
yeah,
out,
that's annoying.
yeah. So, maybe we should see, where are people that are at least following along somewhat that want to do this? Did everybody get the license?
I haven't. It's coming through email or?
Yes, Tom sent it via email.
I sent it to you.
Oh.
I am not responsible for distribution.
Okay, I was gonna say I haven't seen the
Yeah.
email.
You'll get it right away.
I don't have a list. I don't keep lists.
It's a comment.
Okay.
Somehow managed to get booted from my email, great.
I just sent it, Natalie,
Okay.
per
I'll wait
email.
for it to crawl through the servers.
Yeah, let's hold, so people that wanna,
I'll let you know when it comes through, by the way. Okay, looks like at least on my, there it is. Always comes through on my phone first.
You should put it into opinion.
Huh?
So this says terminated to the licensing error, so.
Vincent Steve Turks.
You copy it to the clipboard and then
close out and reopen. Yes, close out of it. Yeah. There, I can also send it to.
Did you get it?
Yes, they did.
You just copy the lines that are the license file into the clipboard, and then you reopen GAMS, and it'll go and find it.
Yeah, so it looks like this worked. Hold on one second. Let me try again. Okay, yeah.
What about
okay.
other people?
So,
I didn't
Like-
receive it.
Yeah, I haven't received it.
um, I'll forward it around.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, let's wait. If it's okay, we can wait.
Yeah, that's
a
fine.
moment.
Take a
Push into our
Read
break.
break, okay.
Or just take like, yeah. Just make sure everybody,
Zeus, Laha.
Tom, you never really used IDE much. This change from group to, no, from project to group. It took me like an hour and a half to figure out they weren't at all the same thing.
Yeah,
So that's, and then that's, the GAMS guys were really good at responding.
No, the group, the young guys, the German group they have at GAMS now. is
Yeah,
fantastic.
these were, the responses came from Germany. I'm pretty
Those
sure
guys are
from
all
the timing.
They're ultra good.
But this thing about editing a file and you click run and it runs some other file. It's just- They go, well, you might be editing some part of it and then, but then you want to run it. They give you some. I'm glad they got rid of project because that was just a completely unnecessary step.
Yeah, that was-
Yep, pretty good.
Bulldog, who are the Bulldogs?
Georgetown, my wife went there. These masks are actually pretty good, so I snagged them.
I walked through there once. No, I gave a paper.
Did you?
Ludima's there, right? There's the trade guy from Western.
Yeah, I never had much overlap interest with them.
Yeah.
No.
While this is taking a moment, I'm just going to suggest something, especially for the colleagues over in DC. If you know, like when we have a moment, if you have any questions about any real life situation that you might want to ask our experts here, Tom and Jim, that actually can work. Because you guys told us, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we're very keen in this workshop to try to be as constructive as we can. I mean, at lunchtime, Colin and I were talking about foreign direct investment, China into the US and US into China. What's the economic effects of either restrictions or how do you evaluate the consequences? And we're trying to brainstorming about this is, one is the theoretical literature. Is this a theoretical dimension that for which there's a literature we can draw on? The other is, do we have data in our framework to do something, to produce some sort of numbers, right? So we had the idea perhaps we could do something about embodied value added, right? Sort of something, way of measuring what the degree of involvement is. So these are things that are just thinking forward. Of course, the thing we also emphasize is the border carbon adjustment relevant there. I've been writing about it the last few years. There's no problem doing a model based on the WinDC data set that looks at that. So we'll definitely include that, but I was just thinking about these other, broader questions about, are there ways that we can show you how this tool can be useful? There's a tendency to try to rely on one model fits all. I basically think one database can fit a lot of things, but typically you want to have a database in several different models that prescribe different focuses. So, and the tools we work with, our emphasis on tools where it's relatively lightweight. The process of constructing a model, the calendar time is intended to be low. It's like GAMS is all about rapid prototyping. Once you have the theory and the modeling tools at your fingertips, it's not that hard. Developing a database, that's hard, right? Getting a database lined up to understand the data. But once you have the database lined up and you got the tools in front of you, it's relatively straightforward. And we're talking about here is GTAP for trade flows and international connections, WinDC for looking at state level things, and then we have GAMS, which is based on, includes the GTAP and GAMS and the WinDC frameworks as a starting point. And we'll do this week is focus on this border carbon adjustment extensions in that framework. But I'm also open to other ways you could do this, and you can calculate like direct and indirect value added in trade, like this is, or measures. There are things that you can do other than just general equilibrium or more industrial organization calculations with the data.
Yeah,
So
basically be thinking about types of policy shocks or ideas that you'd like to try to ask about or model, right? Is that what you're both were saying? Yes.
so let's try to be useful.
Yeah, and so where do we stand on the licenses? Are we good to go? Does anybody need another minute?
I'm good.
I'm good as
so-
well, I think.
Yeah, I'm good too.
Okay, great.
Okay, all right, I think we can press forward then.
Okay, so open a new group. And then if you run the model, did you get what I said about opening the list file automatically? Because you were looking at licenses, and
Yeah, show
let
them.
me just do it quickly again. So you click on File, click on Settings, and then there's a box right here that says Open.lst file after running GAMS. So click that box. Okay. So then in the middle window, you'll get
You can navigate this file on the right-hand side or the left-hand side. So you can move up and down, or you can click on the left-hand side, look at different columns.
So there's a lot of stuff that we're just going to kind of ignore. There's first this sort of echo print of the whole model. So you don't have to go back. If you wonder what you did for some counterfactual, you can have a look. And then a lot of stuff that I kind of forget about. You go down here to solve summary, or you could just click the first solution report. It takes you to the same place. And what you want to see is normal completion and optimal. If it says infeasible or something, there's no point in reading the output because it's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, you can ignore the stuff that says equations. I'm not going to comment on that. What you want are the variable things. So you go down to variable, and there's your 4 values there of each of those variables. This model has solved, I passed the replication check. Okay, it's given back the same values that we put into it. That little ESP is epsilon. It's just a rounding error, and it usually is on the thing you've chosen as numerator. So this is what Tom said about when you fix a variable, you're actually fixing both its upper and lower bounds at the same time in just one command. To unfix the variable, you need 2 statements, and that's actually somewhere in the model. So if this isn't working, there's no point going on and looking at counterfactuals because something is wrong. And so these are the next solution reports. So for example, doubling the supply of capital, is that, or that's, or I skipped one, there was one other up there.
Like a square root of 2 floating around someplace there.
Probably. So this is computing what happens when you double the labor supply. The price of the the quantity of the labor intensive good goes up much more than the capital intensive good. Using welfare as a numerator, those PL and PK are real values. So the real price of labor in terms of the consumer price index goes down and the price of capital goes up. This is just sort of like general equilibrium diminishing returns. So labor is falling because of that.
Those are the equations. You want to scroll down. There you go. That's what he said.
Mhm.
And so that we will see the price of labor.
Yeah.
go up.
So I think what we'll do, I think it might be useful to make a mistake. I'm just gonna put in a line here that says $exit. So I'm just gonna look at the replication check. And suppose I make an error in the model. I screw up Shepherd's lemma, and instead of this number being 0.25, I have it 0.45.
So where'd you put the exit again? Right after. the model?
Right after the first solve statement.
Okay, thanks.
So
Got it.
doesn't. So let me run this model. Okay. It says there's a redefinition of something. Something's not right. I go down to the solve variable, and it's given me a solution. But something is wrong because the marginal on that numerator sector is -18. The other ones to the -7th and -8 are just rounding errors in the solver. Okay, you can ignore those, but something is not right in the model because of this marginal. And often the marginal appears on the numerator sector because it loads all the error onto the equation that's not actually being solved. When you fix a variable, GAMS drops the complementary equation from the model, but it still reports the marginal.
It drops the complementary.
Like, the equation associated with the
Okay.
price of welfare is
Drop.
the expenditure function greater than or equal to PW, but it still proportionally reports the margin that -18 tells me that my model's not right, something's wrong. Okay, now I don't want to detour too much into this, but this helped me a lot when I was learning. I go, what the heck is wrong with this? Well, there's a cute little thing in GAMS that says if you put in the model name close.iterlim equals 0 semicolon, it's just going to do a function evaluation and report back values without taking a Newton step, without trying to iterate toward a solution. Okay, so now, and because when I look at, we looked at that listing file, we have no, I know there's something wrong, but I have no idea what it is, where it is in the model. So if I put in this iterlim equals 0 command and run the model, oh, there's something weird in GAMS. I think iterlim has to be in lowercase or something.
No,
Well, why is it giving me an error, Tom?
closed. You forgot, you misspelled model name. Closed. You have,
Oh, boy, there's infinitely many errors to make. Yeah, sorry. I was talking and typing at the same time. I'm not smart enough to do that. So run the model now. And this is going to give me a hint of where the error is. So it didn't allow the model to iterate. And we have a marginal. I have the starting values, what I think the solution value should be. But there's a marginal of -20 in the PL. And the complementary equation to PL is the labor market clearing equation for labor. So there's a mistake in that equation.
So if I made those changes and I hit run and I'm not seeing them, why would that happen?
What are you getting for a solution?
I'm getting like the right solution, like what we originally had.
There's maybe open in group or whatever.
Yeah, are you running a model that's not the one you're editing?
Well, I'm on my .gms. And I'm hitting the run,
Is it
right?
the only model that's open?
Yeah.
Well, still, it can still, this is a real flaw in Studio that I hate.
It might be running something else, that's what he said.
Just close Madison 1 and reopen using the command open in new group.
Okay. One sec. Yeah, this is. Well, I lost everything now. Hold on.
This is why making up simple models and playing with them is so educational, because, you know, if you start trying to do something with somebody else's big model, it just can't figure out all these infinite number of ways to make mistakes.
When I open it, it never says open in new group. It always says open in current project.
Open in what?
Current,
Oh, yeah, mine
Current
says open
project.
and current project.
Oh, you're using the old editor IDE.
Yeah, you want to use the studio.
This is GAMS Studio.
I am on GAMS Studio too. And I
Maybe an
haven't
older
used
version of it.
this.
I'm using Studio
this here.
35.
So
Oh
this is
dear.
GAMS Studio, right? And now when I go to file, I only have new, open, opening current project.
Oh, shoot.
Let's
Oh, man.
download and make sure we're downloading Jim with the.
Let me open an old version of Studio.
The other thing is now it's like,
Which version?
No, they have the most recent version. So it's more likely that you have the old version, Jim.
No, I have GAMS 35.
No, this is 37.
37 is the latest.
well, I think I have 35, but I have the same problem.
Does yours look the same? Open your window, Jim. Let's have a
For
look.
35?
This thing to take on that mistake.
Okay, so this is GAN Studio 35. And when I click on file, I get open or open a new group.
So do the same thing he's doing and see if it looks the same.
It isn't. I have open and current group, Control Shift.
Yeah, so does mine. Or no,
Oh.
it says, sorry, new, open, open and current project. There's no open and new group. I have 37.
You got open and current project, I got open and current group, and you got open and new group.
Well,
Middle
what it
name.
should be is
No, but
open and
see the
current.
help. Let me see the help and see what version of GAMS you're running, Jim.
I know what version of GAN. Help.
About
Why is it?
About Studio. That tells you the version.
Hey Natalie, were you able to get that error to take?
No, but I think I also lost for a second, so I
I'm
didn't
at
have a chance to type it in.
182. I have
Okay, yeah, I don't know why I keep doing it.
This is GAMS, okay. Oh, the whole thing is called version 35. It's the version of GAMS.
So yours is you're off by two versions away from.
Yeah.
Christ's sake, this is
182,
8 months old.
That's right, but I'm saying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
182 is what I have.
So let's just, I'm gonna open the most recent thing. I don't know.
Well, if you have a command that says open in current group, that's what you want. That's what it should have been written in the first place. Maybe I actually had an effect, but they didn't let me know they changed it.
Well, I have open and current group.
Yes, that's what,
I don't have it.
Okay,
that's,
so then
that's
I
what it should have been written in the first place.
Yeah, so let's say I open this up and I'm changing the parameter here to 0.45. And then
Yeah.
I'm going under my solve and I'm saying $exit, right?
After the solve state.
After the solve, and then I'm hitting the green button. play.
Yeah,
Now it says can't save. This is error. Can't save, and then it's the file name.
Maybe it's opening in a directory.
Well, let's try this. What if I save this model here? As
when you run, it's supposed to automatically save what you've just
That's the
edited.
one version.
Well, so maybe the issue is that it doesn't have ever say, but anyway, I saved it _CRD, then I run it.
And it's not running?
I mean, it's running. It's the problem is my output is the initial model. My solution is like, see,
He's not getting a change. He
I'm not
doesn't
getting
change.
any errors. Yeah, like, you know how you had that negative
Then it's
18?
not-
Go to the other window.
This one?
No, the not first one.
Can it be saving at a different place now?
I don't know. I don't know how to, you know. So here I am. Madison 1 _CRD. I changed this to 0.45. See
Yeah.
that? And then I said exit here. You see?
Yeah.
Then I'm hitting go. And it spit me out
Oh.
this. Well, hold on. This is the bottom. This is the end.
Oh, no, go to the
Yeah, I gotta
first
go to the
cell.
first solve statement. So I go by all this echo, as you call it. And then here's my first solution, which is it's the calibration.
Yeah, we don't have anything under marginal.
You see?
He's trying to find the error. He's trying to regenerate your error.
Yeah, I'm just trying
I'm
to.
just reloading the most recent version so I can do it. I want to replicate what you're getting.
Okay. Because I'd like to see that, just because,
Yeah, exactly. No, but the most important thing is he should be able to follow what you're doing and do it in his machine that will behave the same. If it's not, stop us by all means.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
get this straight. Just taking the time for me to.
has anyone over there been able to get the error with the 0.45 exit at the end? If anyone's following on that, you don't have to, you're not.
I don't know the point for, let me show me where you made the error. Was it?
Yes,
There's
sorry, where is the error in there? Because I mean, I can
Let's just
put
see if
something
we
else
can-
around, but I just want to make sure I'm doing exactly the same thing.
Here, I'll show you.
Okay, I made
yeah.
the wrong one.
If you go to your chat,
You know, share.
Yeah, no, I see it on the screen here too. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
That-
Um,
So I get like a -20 in the marginal for PL. Is that what's,
MKTL, yeah.
okay, so she's getting the right
She's
solution.
getting the right solution. I'm gonna see that I get the same thing and maybe I don't understand. It's like, it must be reading a different file. I don't understand.
yeah,
Yeah, it's weird.
because
It's like, the problem I have with teaching these classes is that if I use my editor, I never make, these sorts of mistakes never show up because I've been using it for 40 years. I know exactly how it works.
Yeah,
And then students try to do the things, they run into errors all the time, and they have to fix them. Whereas if I use the studio to teach the thing, I'm making so many errors that it drives everybody nuts because it's like scratching your fingers on the, I'm so bad at it that people just react to how bad I am at managing the thing. So my problem is I'm stuck between, and my own view, again, I'm a dinosaur and I admit that I'm a dinosaur. My kids always tell me I'm a dinosaur, so I embrace it. But part of it is that, like, I come from an era where you have one text editor, you learn that editor damn inside out. So that's the way you connect the computer is the editor. And then you do everything with the editor. If I write a paper, I use the editor. If I edit code, I use the editor. I use one editor for everything. But increasingly, it's moving away from that, where there are specialized smarts built into the interface that I understand. So when I look at people who use these Microsoft Studio design for this and that, they have a lot more smarts built into the editor. But anyway, that's just a difference of approach. My approach is I want to know I'm editing this file, I run it at this command line, I get that out, I know exactly where things go. Whereas the problem with the interface is if you get some stuff misinstalled, then like you don't know what's happening. It's like, it's very hard. Debugging is much harder in my view.
oh, I got it. I got an error.
Oh, yeah, you got that error. So what did you do?
I just closed it, reopened it, did it again.
It probably was the the thing
running
with-
some other,
Yeah, I actually saved it to my desktop. Then I extracted all his .gms files. Then I ran it again. Then I opened it back up. So I put it on my desktop instead of whatever temp folder it was in.
okay. So for everyone out there, I'm just gonna review what I did. I introduced an error in the model. I changed this, should be 0.25 to be consistent with Shepherd's lemma applied to the cost function. That should be 0.25. I made it 0.45. Now, if I run the model, I'm gonna take out my iterlim equals 0 thing and I run the model. Okay. The solution, it's going to give me a solution, but it's invalid. It's nonsense because there's this marginal here on PW that should be 0. 0 is something to the -7th or -8th or just if it's something, those -7, -8 are just rounding errors in the solver. So I have an error here. I know this isn't a valid solution, but I have no idea where it is in the model. What's wrong? So I go back to the model, and if I use this command called model name.iterlim equals 0, it will just do an initial function evaluation with my starting values and report back without trying to take an iteration.
I see, then you get the margin.
So when I run that, I get this solution. I have a marginal, but now I know I have this is a clue. I'm a detective here. I'm trying to find out where this error is. And I go, well, it looks like the error's got to be in the equation complementary to PL. So I go back to the model and I say, okay, which equation is that? That's the market clearing equation for labor. There's something wrong there. And I say, oh, I see what's the matter. This is supposed to be 0.25. So now when I run it, even with iterlim equals 0, it's going to give me my stuff. Now, let me take one more minute to say how something can look like an error that's not an error. So you have to be careful with iterlim equals 0 because instead of this, suppose I just mistyped a starting value and I put in y.l equals 200. That's not really an error in my coding. That's an incorrect starting value. So if iterlim equals 0, I run the model. Whoa, something's wrong here. Look at those marginals. That's not right. Well, in this case, it's not actually an error in my coding. It was an error in the starting value. It's sort of like a false positive. I got one of those on a medical test recently. Scared the shit out of me for 2 weeks. I'll tell you about that in private. We won't go into that on public Zoom. Okay, so that the error there is not really an error. I'm getting a false positive on it. 0. Okay, so this is often you can put in. You can do this and then afterwards run it again. Then you would see that there was just a starting value. So then afterwards, you can say iterlim equals 1,000 or something. Run it again. And that will tell you that was.
But the key thing here is using the procedural dimension programming tools in GAMS. You can solve it one way and then change things and then solve it another way. So basically a GAMS program is a sequence of assignments, but what's different is that you have this model definition, which defines a structure you interact with. And that's what makes GAMS so convenient, is that you can put in the logic, the idea you have goes into one thing, and then you can work with it and you can change things and rerun it and solve it. And that's part of the reason why GAMS tends to not be a one size fits all because you're going to experiment with it. You get this insight and then you save it there. Tomorrow I'll talk a lot about, I'll go off in the morning or some point tomorrow, I'll talk about how to work GAMS with spreadsheets. You can interact. You can use spreadsheets for handling the inputs and the outputs of the model pretty easily. So it's not, you're not tied to this framework for the analysis. In fact, Jim, you have some examples of your spreadsheets today. In fact,
Yeah. I don't have the execute unload command in here for some. No, I didn't. But that will definitely be coming up
Yeah.
tomorrow. So this is kind of, we should discuss, how late, should we have a break? How late do the Washington people want to?
This would be the right time to have a break according to our
It's a
schedule.
good time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
10-15 minute
And
break.
then I was going to do just a little extension to small open economies to show. I do it a sloppy way here, and then I said, "Oh, this I don't like."
So it might be useful to do an exercise then this afternoon where we give them some, or you have some. included
Yeah,
here,
I
right?
think, Martha, did you mail that zip file? Yeah.
Yes.
It says Kiev, but I looked at them carefully on the weekend and they seem still just as relevant. So we'll see how fast you are relative to Ukrainian and Georgian students.
The Georgians were good, actually.
The Georgians were very good.
Okay, if we take a break now, 10 minutes break, 15 minutes break, what do you want?
15?
15, that sounds good.
So back at 3:50 Eastern time.
Okay.
All right.
I'm happy to go walk across and get a cup of coffee.